It was a warm fall day, and I found myself walking down the sidewalk on the edge of the city. As I walked along the sidewalk, I noticed that there were some brown leaves on the ground. I looked up and I noticed that there were green leaves in the tree. So if there were brown leaves on the ground, where did they come from? I was thinking about the brown leaves and thinking about the green leaves, and as I was thinking about all these things, I tripped. And the whole world started spinning and 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 spinning. And eventually, I woke up. And when the world stopped spinning, I was very, very dizzy. And since I was dizzy, it gave me some time to think about all the things that I was noticing and many of the things that I was wondering about. What do you see? And what do you wonder? I went for a walk along the beach, and I noticed some blue skies, and I noticed some clouds. At first I thought the clouds were everywhere, but when I turned away from the beach and towards the ocean, I noticed there were many fewer clouds. So as I looked at the ocean and looked back at the beach, I wondered, why were there more clouds over the land and less clouds over the ocean? I went to the mountains and I saw lots and lots of clouds. Sometimes the clouds were fluffy. Sometimes the clouds were more wispy. Sometimes there were so many clouds, I felt like I was watching in the clouds. I noticed that sometimes all the clouds seemed to be moving in the same direction, and sometimes it seemed like they were being blocked by the mountains. Then I saw some clouds that looked like they were blowing in different directions. It was as if the higher clouds were blowing away from me, and the lower clouds were blowing towards me. As I watched and thought about the clouds, I wondered about all the different things that might be making the clouds blow in different ways. I went to the shore and went swimming under the ocean. As I swam, I saw lots of different fish. I saw tan fish that were blending in with the coral and rocks on the bottom of the sea. And I saw yellowfish that weren't blending in at all. While most of these yellowfish looked the same, there was one yellowfish that was longer and thinner than all the others. As I watched this thin yellow fish, I wondered, even though it was a bright color, was it still trying to blend in by hiding amongst the other yellow fish? Do fish come together to try to blend in with each other? Walking through the woods, I saw a beaver. I noticed it was eating something, but I couldn't quite tell what it was. I also noticed the beaver had a very flat tail, very flat feet, and very big teeth. And as I watched the beaver sitting there in the forest eating, I wondered, what did it use its flat tail and its flat feet for? And what did it use its big teeth for when it wasn't eating? I wonder if the beaver visited this tree. I visited a tropical dry forest in Costa Rica, and there I saw lots of trees. On one of the trees, I saw an animal that was first climbing up a vine on a tree and then turning and climbing down a vine that was climbing the tree. As I watched the animal, I wondered what it was, and I even wondered a little bit about the vine it was climbing.
It looked like these vines were growing up from the ground and climbing the tree. But then I saw some other vines, and these vines seemed to be hanging from the air, as if they had started their lives high up in the tree and were growing down towards the ground. As I looked at the different vines, I wondered, how could a vine start its life high in the tree and then grow down to the ground? On a tree near the vines, I saw some ants crawling up and down the tree. As I watched the ants, I noticed they were all walking in a line. Some were walking towards the tree, and some were walking away from the tree. And as I watched the ants, I wondered, where were the ants going? What were some of the ants carrying? And how did the ants know where to go with the things they were carrying? How do ants let each other know what to do? I went walking through the forest later that night, and with my bright flashlight, I noticed some animals crawling on the ground. And as I looked at the animals, I noticed they had lots of pretty colors. And as I watched the animals and noticed their pretty colors, I wondered, could the animals see the different colors in the dark, dark night? And if they couldn't see, how could they notice the pretty colors that they and the other crabs had to show everyone? How do crabs see colors when it's so, so dark? I visited Iceland, and I went hiking in the mountains. As I hiked, I saw little bits of light all over the mountains and the valleys. At first, I thought the lights might be little campfires from other hikers. And as I got closer, I realized that those little bits of light might not have been campfires. And as I got even closer, I realized that those little bits of light were parts of a volcano. And as I looked closely at the volcano, I wondered, where do the fiery rocks come from? Where do they go? And what do volcanoes look like after they're done erupting? I went to a place that had almost no plants. There was some dirt, and there were some black rocks. And the rocks seemed very, very warm. And as I looked at the dirt and looked at the rocks, I wondered, why was there smoke coming out of the rocks? I left the volcano and the rocks it formed and found myself in the city. I got on a train and soon found myself at a museum. Let's go see what's inside. Inside the museum, I saw lots of cool rocks and lots of large crystals. Back outside, I saw a huge rock with lots of black crystals. And as I looked at the black crystals, I wondered, what makes crystals shiny and what makes crystals different colors? After leaving the museum, I went to a park and I saw lots of plants. And the plants were called ferns. And when I looked at the ferns, I saw a dinosaur that looked like it might be eating some of the ferns. And as I looked at the dinosaur and looked at the ferns, I wondered, what makes a dinosaur choose to eat different kinds of things? If some animals eat plants and some animals eat other animals, why do some animals eat different things? I saw an elephant hiding in the trees. So I decided to take a closer look. And as I got closer to the elephant, I realized that maybe the elephant could possibly eat trees. So I wondered, do elephants eat trees? And if they do eat trees, why do they have those great big tusks? I went to the beach with water, rocks, and sticks. And on that beach, I noticed a coconut. And when I looked closely, I noticed a tree growing out of the coconut. Back in the forest, I saw lots of coconuts and lots of coconuts with small trees growing out of them. So when I looked at the coconuts and looked at the trees, I wondered, how do coconuts grow coconut trees? We went canoeing on a river and saw a great big turtle with a great big shell and great big claws. As we looked closely at the shell, we noticed that the shell seemed to have some kind of pattern on its back. And as we looked at the shell and thought about other turtles we'd seen, we wondered, do different kinds of turtles have different kinds of patterns on their shells? I visited the river and went paddling in a kayak. As I paddled on the river, I noticed trees and water, and I hoped to see some animals. And while I didn't see any animals, after a while, I started to wonder, how could I be paddling my kayak upside down? I paddled some more and saw something hanging from a tree. Looking more closely, I realized that thing was a nest. I noticed there were wasps coming in and out of the opening. Since I could only see the opening, I wondered what the nest looked like inside. If there were lots of wasps, how did they arrange themselves so there was space for everybody? Over the summer, I saw lots and lots of nesting birds. Some birds had their nest on top of poles. Some birds had their nests on top of trees. Some birds had their nest on the lower branches of smaller trees. Some birds built their nests inside of trees. Some birds built their nests inside of birdhouses. And some birds built their nests on the side of people houses. And there's even some birds that build their nests right on the ground. So as I watched all the birds, I thought about the different places and the different ways the birds built their nests. And as I thought about the places and thought about the birds, I wondered, how do the birds decide what kind of nest to make and where to build their nests? I climbed high in the mountains and I noticed the rocks. I noticed that some of the rocks had lots and lots of straight lines going across them. I noticed some other rocks that also had straight lines. Then I saw some that had slanted lines and even some rocks with curvy lines. So as I looked at the rocks, some straight and some swirly, I wondered, what causes rocks to have lines, and why are the rocks sometimes straight and sometimes swirly? High in the mountains, I saw lots of big rocks, and I saw some smaller rocks rolling down a hill. And as I looked at the rocks, I wondered, do big rocks and small rocks roll the same distance? Do big rocks roll faster or farther? Or do small rocks roll faster and farther? How does the size of a rock affect how far or how fast it rolls? As I started to leave the mountains, I realized it might be difficult to build a road in the mountains, always having to go up and down. Engineers found a way that they didn't have to drive over the mountains. I saw lots and lots of tunnels, and I wondered how they were built. We went exploring in the forest and we found some bones. And as we looked at the bones and we looked at the different shapes and sizes of the bones, we wondered what kind of animal left these bones behind, what part of the animal's body did each of the bones come from, and are some animal bones similar to or even the same as human bones? I went to the shore and I stood on the rocks, watching the waves come in and out of the ocean. And as I looked at the rocks and saw some water crashing on the rocks, I noticed there was some mist or water that was getting caught in the air. And as I watched the water and the sunlight make interesting colors in the sky, I wondered, how are rainbows made? And if the water and sunlight passing through the water and the air can make rainbows, what other things can light pass through to make rainbows? I saw some fish jumping and swimming upstream in the Potomac River. I watched the fish, and I watched the fish some more. Sometimes I watched above the water, and sometimes I watched below the water. And as I watched the fish, I started to wonder, why were all these fish swimming up the river? Where were they going, and where did they come from? Somewhere in the city, I saw a really tall building with lots of shapes. I wondered, how did the shapes help the building be tall and strong? After looking at the building, I learned that it was called the Eiffel Tower. I noticed the tower was wide on the bottom and narrow on top. And I noticed the bottom had lots of arches or curves that seemed to hold the tower up. I walked further through the city and I saw arches on the top of windows. I visited a church and saw tall arches holding up a cathedral. I saw small arches holding up a bridge. And as I looked at all the arches, I wondered, how do arches and how do circles, triangles, and other supports help a really tall tower stay tall and strong? After all that time exploring, I decided to go for one more walk. And as I walked, I heard something up in the trees. And when I looked up in the tree, I saw monkeys. These were spider monkeys. They move really fast, and they use their arms, legs, and tails to grab the branches. And as I watched the monkeys, I wondered, do all kinds of monkeys use their arms, legs, and tails to grab and run through the trees? And are there any other kinds of animals that have similar body parts and use them in similar ways?
We have just done lots of exploring and observing, lots of thinking about what we were exploring and observing, and lots of wondering. Now it's your turn. We're going to do some exploring together, and I want you to think about and you to share some of the things you see, maybe some of the things you saw, what you're thinking about them, and what you are wondering. Let's start exploring together. Remember, 1, hold one object at a time. 2, use 2 hands with everything you hold. 3, be careful, 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 because everything is fragile. And 4, remember to keep the objects at your station. You can go to other stations when your teacher says it's okay, and the objects always stay at the station they started. The objects never move.